I think we should
Yeah,
start now and people can keep joining in.
yes. Dr. Suthar, I will introduce you first and the Baithak, and then wait, there are people in the waiting room, and then we'll have Dr. Jasa take over and we'll have you. So I think we can start now. Hello, everyone. I, Chetna, welcome you all on behalf of the Dark for our 24th Dark Baithak. The Dark began in 2023 as a book review journal, publishing original reviews across disciplines and genres. From the start, we sought to reimagine the form of the book review itself, encouraging writing that moves beyond summary to engage deeply, reflectively, and creatively with the world a book opens up. Over time, we grew into a biannual academic journal that now includes reviews, explainers, commentaries, and research essays. Each issue is built around a central theme, bringing together diverse voices that explore the intersections across social sciences. The Dark Baithak is our humble attempt to huddle around a small gathering of scholars, writers, and students from different fields to present ideas and initiate dialogue, bringing critical conversations to life. Today, we are very chuffed to host our first book discussion with Dr. Sudhir Kumar Suthar for his upcoming book, Farmer Power, the 2020-21 Movement, the State and Agricultural Reforms in India. On behalf of the DARK team and the participants here, please accept our heartfelt congratulations for the book, sir. Dr. Suthar teaches at the Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. A prolific writer, he has published books on the politics of development, rural change, and public policy in India. He is also a traveler, blogger, and poet. He has been actively involved in motivating young researchers to explore the realities of rural India through an academic network called Rural and Agrarian India Network. He also works with various civil society organizations and international academic networks. His upcoming book, Farmer Power, examines the 2020-21 farmers movement and delves into its evolution, history, and what made it unique on the global scale. This book also delves into broader agricultural sector issues, including the challenges faced by small and marginal farmers, agricultural laborers, and the limitations of the procurement system. On behalf of the entire DARK team and our participants, I extend a warm welcome to you, sir, and thank you for making the time to be here with us today and share an insight about your book. Now, I invite Dr. Jigyasa to please take over.
Thank you so much, Chetana, for that introduction to both Sir as well as the Dark. On a personal note, I wanted to take over and congratulate Sir on behalf of the team, but also his students. For all those who don't know this, I'm a student of Dr. Suthar, and along with the generous introduction that he deserves as far as his academic work and teaching is concerned, he's also a great mentor. His room is always open to students in both good and bad times. He has provided, I remember, and I bring back a number of those conversations to him to remind him of the good work. I remember in my master's class, I went to him and I said, "But how? Where is the argument? How do I find it?" And he sat me down. He had the patience to sit me down. He opened a book and he taught me how to read a book, where to find the argument, how to read a book, how to sit with it. So that's the legacy that we're congratulating, that we're celebrating today. Of course, he has many more years and very good work waiting, but this is a book, and I have a copy. And Sir chose to speak about this book for the first time with his students on an online platform, which otherwise he's very uncomfortable with. So I'm also very grateful for the copy, and many congratulations, sir. And letting also thank you. I'm most grateful for letting us open it here from different parts of the country, and the fact that people are joining in also from SOAS, because some of your students are not here in Delhi who couldn't be there tomorrow. So they're doing it here. So thank you so much. And I also want to take like 2 minutes to say this. This is not a work that he's only started doing now after the farmers movement. In fact, these are conversations that he's been doing for over a decade. And he also has a book on the dilapidation of the rural, which I had the good fortune of attending a discussion for and reading eventually, where he ties up all these questions. And as Chetna mentioned, there's a network for agrarian studies. And a whole lot of us would realize that when you actually want to look out for agricultural questions, even within economics, there's rarely any scholar that comes to your mind in terms of, great theoretical and empirical work, but Sir's work kind of bring together both those things. So I'm also excited to see what Rain Network does in future, and what holds for academia in this direction, which seems to be a very important one for all of us. So on that note, I both congratulate and welcome Sir. It's a great honor and privilege to open this discussion, which will probably hopefully be the one of the first ones, but not the last ones. And it would open up a series of discussions. There's a book discussion tomorrow at JNU as well. So all those who are on campus are most welcome to come for that. And to you, sir. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you so much, Jigyasa and Aditi. Uh, I'm speechless. I just don't know what to say. It's such a kind introduction, which I think I don't deserve actually. But what makes us what we are is colleagues, students, friends like all of you who have traveled this journey along with all of us. And I think it's a mutual, you know, working of this relationship, which gets reflected sometimes in some academic works. And I must thank you for organizing this because, as you said, this is the first formal discussion on this book, which is, I mean, taking place in a public platform. And although I'm uncomfortable with online platforms, as you said, but I also know and realize that sometimes, in order to reach out to a wider audience who otherwise may not be able to join, online platforms do provide access to a wide range of audience or friends who may have otherwise may not have been in a position, to join the discussion. So thank you so much for organizing this, and it means a lot. This work, especially, uh, as you said, that I have been engaged with this work for a very long time, and this was actually a dream come true, in the sense that such an event happened at the international uh, level. I mean, it was not only an India centric movement that we were actually looking at. Uh, And writing on such a phenomena of, I would say, of the 21st century in itself was something very exciting as a journey as a scholar. And what made it more exciting was linking it with my earlier work, the way I have been trying to understand rural and agrarian issues in India. So, and I must say that this work actually owes a lot to many people. Uh, some of your friends were quite helpful in doing this. And of course, my colleagues, friends around, family members, they all have actually contributed greatly to this process. Now, what I intended to do when I was working on this book was actually two things. And assuming that a lot of people who have joined here are in the field of social sciences, the two objectives were, one is to provide an empirical account of the things which happened on the borders of Delhi for a year. Besides, there was also an attempt to actually understand this event not merely as an Indian moment, but something which was actually a moment of global history. And when I start this book, I begin with this, that one must not forget that after when this movement was going on and when it got over, there were a series of protests which took place in different countries of Europe, which we otherwise recognize as a developed world, and where we had presumed that development has taken place and these countries are by and large settled countries in terms of developmental trajectories. But when we saw farmers blocking the highways, throwing vegetables and fruits on the roads, bringing JCBs, tractors near Eiffel Tower, and carrying the similar kind of placards which you saw on the borders of Delhi, uh, making and calling it only an Indian moment would have been perhaps underestimating the movement and its strength. And that's the reason that I begin with looking at it from the perspective of famous social scientist Barrington Moore, who in one of his famous book had said that peasantry in India was not in a position to resist the oppression because it was a divided peasantry. And I attempted to argue that what this movement had shown and proved Barrington Moore emphatically, categorically, completely wrong was the fact that the peasantry was able to show that we had the capacity to get united despite all our differences, and we could stand up against uh, a regime which was being run by the world's largest, strongest political party, and with an absolute majority, and which was otherwise not known for compromising on its reform agenda. Now, this contribution of this movement was a remarkable and unique one in itself. Besides, what makes this movement also unique is, and that's the second major point which I attempted to highlight, is that after the Gandhian movement and its impact on other movements in the world, especially in the United States of America and in South Africa that we are familiar with. Perhaps this was the second such moment of Indian history which actually saw echoing its voices in different corners of the world. So, as a scholar of social sciences, political science, who are located in India, it's necessary to remember that this movement's legacy is much larger and much bigger than what perhaps usually we think about when we talk about it. Uh, the other major aspect which I tried to highlight and which I think I must share it here, that when this movement happened, we must remember that the political opposition in India was an absolutely confused state. It did not know what to do with an agenda, what to do with mobilization, how to bring different political groups together, and so on and so forth. This movement actually came as a hope in that sense. And another book which has come up on this movement, uh, it titles at the movement as Hope for Everyone. Because when there was a despair, when there was an anxiety, when was ambiguity about India's political fortune, this movement came with a new hope. And what is interesting is that this hope did not come from academic circles of JNU, IIC, IHC, or Bangalore or Calcutta. This hope came from the streets of Punjab, the villages of Punjab, people of Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Western UP, Madhya Pradesh, who camped on the borders of Delhi with one common objective, that is the repeal of common laws, but with one common tool, and that is democratic resistance. And it's a remarkable moment in the history when millions of people were stationed on the national capital and its highways, and not even a single instance of violence was ever recorded. And Supreme Court of India had highlighted time and again that whatever had happened on the borders was did not happen because of the farmers or the unions. It happened because of the state machinery and perhaps its mishandling of the situation. The only instance which happened was on 26th of January in 2021, and even that moment we still don't know what transpired. But other than that, from the farmers union side, there was no incident reported which one could say that could show that it was a diversion from the objectives of the movement of. And we must also remember winters and summers are extremely harsh in Delhi. It's a city with extreme climatic conditions, and then you had pandemic in the middle of it. And yet, all these people stationed, camped, stood there firm with one belief that we believe in India's democracy. I think that trust in India's democracy shows Uh, and I think that also explains a puzzle which political scientists have been confused about in the past 7 decades. What explains success of India's democracy? I think this as attachment shows the success of India's democracy. This doesn't belong to any building or any political party or any book or any law or anything else. It actually belongs to the people of India. And this movement was actually a representation of that moment. Uh, and finally, one point which I have tried to build upon, and which I think which was in the academic circles for some time, but in Indian academia we haven't really worked upon it. That is the kind of hybrid political agenda this movement was able to build. And of course, it was a bumpy road. It was a road which was full of ups and downs, potholes, and other disturbances. And yet, these farmer unions, which were otherwise always divided and fighting with each one of them amongst each other, they were able to overcome all those differences. Now, how did they do that? That is a question which we can guess, but we don't exactly know as political theorists. And I think that tells us that there is something more beyond the rational choice theory, the social choice theory, the constraint choice theory. There is something else which explains the survival of democracy in a society. And I think it explains a theoretical inadequacy to explain otherwise why people have so much of faith in democracy. And the kind of hybrid politics uh, which people were able to create. Now, I am using the word people here time and again because no political party was officially associated with this movement. But we must also remember no civil society organization was actually officially associated with the movement, because the movement said that it's a movement of the unions, and there were hundreds of unions actually. So when I say hybrid agenda and people, it doesn't mean the officially recognized organizations whom we call as actors in political society. Now, the hybridity which they were able to create or generate was something which was full of difficulty. It wasn't an easy task actually to achieve it. And the book talks about some of the features of this hybridity, and in a couple of other places I have also talked about it. I'm not talking about going to talk about it in details here, but and then finally, what this movement also did was that it actually redefined some of the conceptual categories that the way we think. And the first and foremost contribution of this movement was it redefined the way actually we imagine the very idea of a political space. Nobody had ever thought that highways with a divider in the middle could actually become a political site. Nobody had ever thought that people eating, bathing, singing, sloganeering on the highways for a year would actually redefine how the roads in India look like. So, and this idea was not something which was actually pre thought or pre planned. It just turned out to be a public space. And, and it actually also had shown that the politics for democracy doesn't really take place on Jantar Mantar or the Parliament Street. The democracy actually lies outside these spaces. So, as I said, that the elite circle or the circle which are meant for an intelligentsia class in India was something very different from the way it was actually taking place on the national highways of India. Now, all of this was something which redefined the way we look at democracy in India. And above all, the confused opposition was able to make sense about what was happening in India and how to proceed in a democratic polity, in a democratic sense. So, for me, this was actually a defining political moment for India's democracy. And it wasn't actually a moment of protest that happened for a year. It was a series of events that had happened before that. And the farmer movement was actually a culmination of those series of events. And I think perhaps I can say that apart from the tragedy of COVID, we would also be a generation who could take pride in saying that, okay, we were part of this moment. When it happened, we witnessed this moment. And I also look at this moment when it had told that India's democracy should not and cannot be understood merely by looking at its political parties or the politics which revolves around political parties. The whole idea of people's movement was very much alive, dynamic, and effective as a political tool. I think the Gandhian legacy of a movement was reborn during this moment. And I think this moment requires more such recordings, more such uh, archiving and documentation. The more we do it, the better it is. But I think this is a moment which we all should cherish for democracy of India. Of course, there are lots of criticisms which revolve around the movement, around its agenda. But I think there is one thing which has not received any criticism, which is about the means adopted by this movement. There is not even a single criticism which says that the means adopted were undemocratic and unfair. One can say that, okay, the agenda was feasible, not feasible, whether one could do that, and there can be all other kinds of criticisms about the movement. But nobody could ever say that the means adopted by the movement were unfair. And I think that was actually the crux of Gandhian movement, that it's not only the ends which matter. What matters also is the means adopted. And this particular movement had shown that means are equally powerful, means are equally relevant when one looks at democracy and the politics around it. So I think I'll stop here and we can open it up for discussion. Is that okay, Jigyasa?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That kind of opens up a broad spectrum for us to work with. Um, I would invite if there are any questions or um, concerns at this stage. You can type your questions in the chat box as well.
I have a few questions, but I'm hoping that people will take up questions first and then I can go on. Hopefully, they'll cover up my questions because they're like pretty basic, like the first thing that someone would think of while covering farmers' progress. So, yeah.
So, Cheta, why don't you ask your questions and meanwhile others would warm up too and start. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, sir, I have, I think, 3 to 4 questions. First is that the farmers' movement was very notable for its coalition. I'm sorry, someone's in the waiting. Yes, the movement is very notable for its coalitional character, for bringing together um, diverse range of groups and unions. But then I would like to know, how did your research while you were on the field for, you've been in this arena researching for about 10 years. How did your research engage with the internal differentiation within the movement, especially along the lines of caste and class? Because there's a lot of difference, material differences between large and marginal farmers, regional differences in Punjab, Haryana, caste-based and gender. So, how did the movement's demands to have a unity was able to subvert these hierarchies and differentiation? So, that's my first question. Should I note all of the questions first, or would you like to take it up and then? Uh, was I
Uh,
audible?
yeah, I'm absolutely fine. If you want to ask further questions and then want me to respond, I can do that.
We can collect a few questions. And there is a question in the chat box also. Chetna, can you read that question out loud?
Yes, of
Hmm.
course. Just a moment. Chat box. Hmm. Uh, Someone called. No, sorry. I'm so sorry. Uh, yes. What about the laws themselves? Were they really anti-farmers? It's being said that the laws would help small farmers, and it was only big farmers who were hit by it, and they were the ones who were lobbying against it. So that's a question for you to take up. Uh, should I go ahead with my other questions? Do you want? Okay, okay. Just I think there's another question in the
I
chat
I
box.
I don't know. More than a chat box, I think somebody's trying to unmute themselves and speak. If you have a
Oh,
The now the with the three laws coming in, and prior to that, the debate about MSP was something which had sent a clear signal to the farmer unions that if they don't get united, perhaps they won't be relevant players anymore. Okay, that was one sense of, actually it was a sense of loss in that sense, which propelled these unions to come together. That's number one. The second major aspect about it was that what the three farm laws did, that they did bring in a law which would demolish the existing mandi structure in India, and it will be replaced by different private players who would be involved in agricultural marketing, sale, and purchase. Now, if the mandi goes away, the whole space for bargaining, for negotiation, would actually go away. And the farmers would be vulnerable to all the conditions which would be created by the private actors in this field. Now, a big question is that why does that happen? Now, the another question which was raised is actually related to this, that whether the laws were anti farmers or not. I think the first and foremost point is that when the farmers themselves had said that this is not something in our welfare, I think that deserves to be heard and taken into consideration. And secondly, I think the best response to this was given by the Prime Minister himself. When his address to the nation while declaring the repeal of the laws, he said that perhaps we were unable to convince the farmers about the benefits of the three laws. In other words, there was a communication lag. There was a communication gap between what the state was thinking and the way farmers looked at it. So it's not actually a black and white picture where a law is beneficial for farmers or not beneficial for the farmers. It's actually about a law which the people for whom it was actually made, they themselves were not convinced that it was addressing their concerns in a genuine way. Now, and this is not only about this legislation, it applies to even other legislations which are framed in a democracy. Look at the Land Acquisition Act. It took how many years to come up with the Land Acquisition Act? Because there were so many distinct players involved that it was actually a complex process to have such a legal mechanism. And such a legal mechanism is a time taking process. But when there is a bypassing of different democratic institutions and the very process of deliberation, the state or government must always be ready to accept that it may actually result into some kind of agitation or resistance from the people. And that's what happened in case of the three farm laws. Now, this simply tells you one thing, that perhaps there was something lacking in these three farm laws apart from what was already there. And perhaps there should have been better cushioning mechanisms, better insurance institutional mechanisms, which should have been a part of these laws in order to convince farmers that what exists is not going to be taken away, which later on the Home Minister, Agriculture Minister, in their various meetings did communicate. But since it was not in the legal domain and the three laws were something very different from this intent, the unions had no other option but to demand the repeal of the three laws. Now, the discussion about the three laws being good or bad is something which we can continue to do. But we know one thing, that there was a unrest which demanded consideration. Okay. Now, about so these two things, one about unions being irrelevant, and second, loss of that space where they could bargain, negotiate with the state. I think both these fear factors compelled the unions to actually come up together and have a unified agenda. Now, this unified agenda doesn't mean that the differences were not there. Differences were very much there. In fact, they exist even till date. But what the unions were able to do is that let's keep our differences away and think about the agenda which can unify us. And that actually made this historic moment. Now, the agenda that unified these unions continues to remain relevant even till date. We may see a different kind of politics emerging out of it. We may not see any alternative politics emerging out of it. But what it was able to tell, that there is a possibility to have a common political ground for people to come together and speak against the actions of the state. Okay. Chetna, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir. Should I read out the questions in the chat box?
I think I can see the chat box, so I can also do that. Is that okay?
Okay.
Uh,
Yes, there are multiple questions. There's one from Pratham.
I want
Dr.
to hear
Ram,
from Ram. From Ram, if you could allow Ram to speak.
yes, I have given him the permission. Dr.
Yeah, Ram,
Ram,
if you are here, then can you?
I'm asking him to unmute.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, he's
so, so am I audible?
Yes, yes,
yes,
you are.
yes.
Go ahead.
Uh, so, hi, sir. Congratulations to you for this book. So, when you are emphasizing on the ideas of means and end, that many of the scholarship they have not taken this into account, and you were trying to say that so there is a Gandhian larger note in the larger movement. I was wondering if the unions would share the same set of views. For example, most of these unions they have a history of working through through the lens of a left or a kind of a Marxist paradigm. Many of these unions they began with that note and they continued to build and organize uh, uh, at least for decades. So, in terms of their own predisposition, how do you frame the larger Gandhian note? Are you superimposing this note, or is this the identification of the union themselves? So that is the one kind of question. So I'll leave it.
Ram, I have a very apt answer to this question. A friend of mine, who is also a colleague of mine, he keeps saying that Gandhi is the last resort for most of the political groups in India. When you are not left with any other political option, Gandhi becomes the rescuer. So, and this actually applies to what you said, those who believed in Marxist framework too. And I think, Ram Guha also highlights this point very beautifully when he says that the only figure in India whom you can accuse for anything is Gandhi. Because either he belonged to nobody or he belonged to everybody. That's what makes the Gandhian movement and its legacy extremely flexible. And when I'm saying that the unions were able to do it, the interesting thing is that all those unions who never saw each other eye to eye, in fact, the very rise of what we call as the New Farmers Movement, BKU and others, was very much against the left leaning Communist Party affiliated farm unions in India. But on this occasion, they all came together and decided to have a common minimum ground for resisting against the three laws. So it doesn't really matter whether the unions in their agenda or in their discourse accept this or not. But if you look at the way it was practiced, I think one cannot deny that it was very much Gandhian in nature. In fact, including the unions would not be able to deny this. even if they were Marxist organizations, they were CPI, CPM affiliated organizations, and there were other independent organizations, including the organization associated with the currently ruling party. I think none of them can actually deny that what they were trying to do was to actually go by the Gandhian mode of resistance. I hope I answered it.
So we can move on to the next question. There are questions in the chat box. Hello, am I audible? Dr. Haram has written yes, his question was answered. So, sir, are you able to access the chat box or should I read out the questions? You are muted. I'm asking you to unmute.
Yeah, thank
Yes,
you. I was not
you're
able
out.
to. So the next
Yes, sir,
question
it's
I may read out from Pratham. Thank you
hmm.
for your wishes. How did the movement help us reimagine and redefine the very idea of what a protest is and what its terms of engagement vis-a-vis the state public space should be? How did the movement itself deal with its internal differences? Now, with regard to the first question, that how did it redefine the very idea of a protest? I think eventually we have been, when we read about protest movements in India, usually we look at it from an organized group structure based movement. I think what this movement had told us, that the people were capable of creating an independent organization for themselves, and they did not need a party cadre to do it on their behalf. I think that's something which was really remarkable about this protest. The second thing is, which I haven't really touched upon in the book, but I intend to look at it. I think this movement built upon the very idea of political emotions very beautifully. I mean, uh, the way people responded to different moments which happened during the protest, especially the Tikat's viral video where he was in tears saying that I will not drink water unless I get it from my own village. And that actually turned the tide again in favor of the farmers. So, for a moment, I think the state thought that now this movement is going to get over after the 26th January incident. But the reverse happened. And the farmers came back with a new spirit of struggle, saying that even if we have to sit here for a decade, we will sit here. Now, this wouldn't be possible without getting into emotional sentiments of the people whom they claimed to represent. I think political parties in India need to learn about it. That's something this protest actually reimagined the whole idea of a protest. So it's not about only material benefits getting from the state. It's about something which is emotional, close to the hearts of the people. How do you build a movement on that? I think later on, when Rahul Gandhi started his Bharat Jodo Yatra, he had realized that he need to do that. And I believe that he was able to emerge as a strong, powerful leader because he got this point from this movement. The second question that you have asked is the okay. So within this, you have another question: terms of engagement vis-a-vis the state public space should be. I think what this movement did was that the terms of engagement will be decided by people and not by the state. So state was willing to offer them a protest venue where they said it will be comfortable. People said, no, we don't want a comfortable venue. We want a venue from where we can reach out to wider people. And that's how the highways became the new protest site. So you don't need a permission from the DCP or from the DM or from somebody else to actually mark a site, a protest site. You just make a site a protest site. That's what this movement did. How did the movement deal with its internal differences? I think uh, there were two mechanisms which were very effective. The first is that anything that would be said in the public domain would be said only if there is a consensus amongst the leaders. And second, an understanding that the differences which would take place in this meeting would not be brought out in the public domain. Uh, but there is something else as well, which is a point which my friend Mandeep Punia has also highlighted in his book, that actually this was not a movement which was led by only the unions. In fact, many a times unions were willing to take a different position, but it was the people, the participants, who resisted that you can't take this position, and which forced the unions actually to withdraw their positions. So after 26 January incidents, the unions were really broken. They were really in a very bad shape because they realized that perhaps they were not in a position to control the movement. But the people refused to go back. And they said that nothing doing, we will sit here. If you are not able to provide leadership, it's bad. Okay, you can go back. Now, this assertion was something which resulted into overcoming the internal differences, because the leadership realized that if I leave this venue, I am irrelevant. And if I have to stay here, then I have to be in a political dialogue with other actors so that I remain relevant. So it was actually a question mark on the unions, parties, their agenda, their leadership, because it was something propelled by the people and their emotions. So I think that was something which was motivating these unions to move forward. Okay, and then there is another question that the farmers refused to engage with the government. Perhaps the government kept asking for delegations to meet them, whereas the farmers said first laws should be repealed. Not exactly. There were 9 rounds of dialogues that happened. Maybe they could have engaged in dialogue. They did. And even if we can postpone the question about the merit of laws themselves, the mode of engagement for farmer side also leaves something missing, perhaps. Yes, I agree. That I won't deny that perhaps farmers could have engaged in some other better mechanisms and better ways, but that's how a movement plays out. Uh, and we, again, as I said, that unions were not in a position actually to tell the people that you go back, because the people said that nothing doing, we are not going back without the repeal. So unions, even if they would have actually adopted other ways of dialogue, I don't think the movement would have ended. That's a question which we need to perhaps engage furthermore. But yes, I won't deny that uh, the the mode of engagement perhaps could have been different. Uh, then there is a question from Sneh Kamar. Uh, Means is equally responsible and important, and here nobody criticized the means. So I wanted to ask, what means are you referring here for a better understanding, as I have looked from the empirical lens as an example? Could you elaborate a little more on this? Sneh, thank you for your wishes, and I hope that you read the book, and I believe that it won't be a waste of time. But this is actually a good question. What do I mean by means? The means here had, one is what we called during the Gandhian movement civil disobedience, where Gandhi had said that I will resist a law with peaceful means till my last breath, but I will not get involved in any form of violence or hinsa. I think that was a message which was communicated by this movement. And time and again, different leaders also said that this movement is a movement that belongs to people who believe in peace and not violence. So when I am talking about means, that's what I am referring to. Okay. The second was uh, not exactly, but to some extent, the whole idea of non cooperation. Now, this idea of non cooperation was not something which came very explicitly in this movement. But at the same time, you will see that there were people across the world who supported this movement. It included different singers, included academicians, it included, of course, politicians, and so many unions from different parts of the world had shown their solidarity with the movement. I think this kind of support and solidarity was also a way to tell the government that we are not cooperating with a, a law which is unacceptable to people. So by means, I mean these two factors, which I can say that which were actually a legacy of the Gandhian movement. Uh, Yes, this is a good question actually. That the movement was devoid of real farmers, which is in material terms landless tillers. This also emerged from the topic of inconvenience to the state. We have certainly disagreed from those misunderstandings about the differences and consensus within the caste class differences, as it also grew to the extent of popularity and significant that the Khap Panchayats led their support towards by January 2025. So sorry, I didn't understand the last point. But yes, this question has been asked that whether it was about the real farmers. Uh, Actually, in India, nobody knows who the real farmer is. I mean, those who own the land, that's what the government says are the farmers. Those who are working on the land, tillers and so on, of course, they are the farmers. The landless laborers who are engaged in it, of course, they are the farmers. The women who are helping in doing agricultural work, of course, they are farmers. So, farmers is a very broad category which includes a range of people and actors. You can't say that, okay, this is a farmer and this is not a farmer. Now, when you talk about the size of the land, we should not forget that, and I remember this coming up in during my field discussions with farmers, that 20 years ago, the person whom we used to know as a big farmers, after expansion of family and division of the land, the same farmer family have become a family of small farmers. So it's actually a dynamic way, the way things are shifting in the rural areas. I don't think this criticism is actually a very valid criticism. Okay. There are, of course, economic logics and criticisms about the laws, its impact, that those criticisms can be taken up in a public debate and must be discussed, I would say. But movement as a political activity and as a movement is something which is very different from its agenda and its feasibility vis-a-vis the state. And what I'm primarily looking at it as a political movement. Uh, yeah, I think I have read all the questions in the chat box. Chetna.
Yes, sir. If anybody wishes to verbally ask their question and would not want to type them out, just please type it in the chat box that you would like me to unmute you, and then I will do so. Uh, Other than that, we can wait for more questions. And so I also have one question, if you'll be willing to take it up.
Please, please.
The laws that were passed were introduced as money bill because agriculture is in the state list, and if they would have, so the state would have had to go into the amendment procedure to take it up as a matter of the state list. So they were pushed as a money bill to reduce the power of the Rajya Sabha to recommend changes. So how do you think this exposes the tensions on in the federal structure? It reignites the debate and the division of power, the separation of powers, and the stability of the federal structure. How do you think this questions and reignites those tensions in the federal structure
That's actually a very
constitution?
pertinent question. And we haven't really looked at this entire debate from the federalism perspective. That the way these laws were brought in a way to bypass the constitutional structure which promises federalism. And one must remember that these protests had actually shown the after effects of bypassing such a political institutional structure. Uh, and Now there is one thing which I have discussed in the book as well, that in 2014, if I remember it correctly, or 2016, the economic survey, it was said that the government has been trying very hard to get the reform process go in the agriculture sector, but states have not been cooperating with the central government. And if the union government has to take certain harsh steps, it is willing to go ahead with those reforms. And this was said much before the laws came into existence. Now, in case of India, if we look at the political economy of reforms on which many people have written about, we must remember that India's economic reform process were qualitatively different from the way reforms were imagined either in Europe or in Eastern Europe after the collapse of the Soviet Union, what we call as a shock therapy approach. India's approach to reforms, and we must remember not only about reforms, India's negotiations, bargaining, assertions, criticisms of WTO and climate change negotiations have always been motivated by the demand to have a gradual process. On all international platforms, India have always advocated a gradual process of reform. And the same process India adopted in its economic reforms. Now, in other words, whenever reforms have been imagined, they have been imagined keeping in mind the cost involved in reaching out to a consensus. I think these farm laws were actually a subversion of that very basic understanding of federalism in India. And uh, this subversion was pushed back by people through their own ways of resistance. And we must also remember one more point, which again we haven't really discussed, that the union said that they will not approach the Supreme Court. And unions didn't approach the court actually. Now, Supreme Court of India is considered to be actually the guardian of the federal structure. Now, if people do not have faith in that guardian, I think the guardian has to rethink. So, actually, this protest, this movement, was a wake up call for Indian federalism in a way, apart from India's legislative process. And it's not about, I think, giving statements like, because farmers were not willing to listen, or maybe there were other factors involved. I think it's always better to engage with different players and work out how to overcome these differences. And in the book, there is a full fledged chapter which talks about the consensus which had emerged in India over some of the issues which were addressed in the three farm laws. And you would be surprised that there were around 11 major committees and their reports available with Government of India, and none of those reports had recommended that only APMC Act should be done away with. All those reports, including the reports which came up after 2014 when the current government came into power, and it had constituted a committee, what is called the Doubling Farmers' Income. Even that committee had given recommendations that state has to support farmers, and state support is actually essential for development of agriculture in India. What the farm laws did is just the opposite. Now, again, I am a bit confused about it. That why a state would go to such an extent and take such a drastic step, I don't know. We don't have an answer. But I think apart from the behavior of the movement, it would be interesting to look at the behavior of the state when it comes to reforms. What creates this kind of an anxiety in the state behavior to go for reforms at the cost of its own farmers? We have seen the pitfalls of reforms in Southeast Asia, in Eastern Europe, in Russia, the devastating effects reforms can have. And even then, if political leadership thinks of reforms as a panacea or a one time solution, I think we need to talk about reforms in a more political sense.
Thank you so much, sir. That really answers my questions very in-depthly. There is one question, very thorough question by the Pancho in the chat box. If you can read that.
Uh,
So can you view it?
I think Saeed
Okay.
Afan. Whether you think the
No,
movement,
after that, the Panshu's question, are you able to see?
I can, yes, 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 yes.
Yes, sure, sir. I thought that Saeed Afan's question had been taken up, but sure.
No, I don't think so. No. My
Um,
question is whether you think the
so
I
movement.
you talked about the real
now in
farmers.
new circumstances, I've been nodding my head throughout the entire discussion, but because my video is off, you wouldn't know, sir, and everybody else. And because I've been unmuted, I would want to take that opportunity to start speaking. I think there are two questions. And I think one, Sayyid Afan's question, I think also needs to be engaged with. And I also want to point out that the Panshu, whose question comes forward, is not from social sciences and and his question probably comes from a very different space. So I wanted to put that caveat out there when Sir takes that question up. And of course, if time allows, even I have a question, but once these are answered, thank you, Cheta.
Okay, okay.
The
So let
Sayyid Afan's last question on caste differences.
let me just answer Saeed Afan's question first, and then I'll go to the Panshu. Is that okay?
Yes, yes, sir, sure.
In terms of material transformation in the local context of Punjab and Haryana, and as we know that this has been a period of heightened repression, has really sustained itself. I believe that by the end of 2024, the movement's primary goal, other than the 12 large demands, was about the fundamental liberty to reclaim the right to protest. And how do you perceive this? Additionally, a vague criticism that came from the urban anti-protest bogey was that the movement was devoid of. Oh, okay, this one I answered. Sorry. Uh-huh. Uh, I didn't understand the second part of that question about the class caste differences and the popularity and significance that the Khat Panchayats lent their support towards by January 2025. Uh,
Sir, I have requested Sayyid Afan to unmute themselves. Hopefully they will. If they don't, you could probably take up the first question.
okay. So Dipanshu, a new seed act is being introduced mainly to control the quality of seeds and seedings available to the farmers. Makes sense. Farmers invest years into growing a fruit plant, and if it isn't true variety he planted, years of mehnat goes to waste. However, ornamental nurseries are also being brought into the purview, which means propagation and growing would be very difficult. Too much documentation required. Nursery men across India are not united, not educated enough to understand the impact even. Our association is trying to oppose certain sections of the bill, approaching ministers and legislatures at various levels. What seems the most sensible way to approach it? Any advice would help. Yes, there are a couple of organizations which are also looking at this seed bill, and they are actually, I think, sending their inputs to the government. Maybe you can write to me and I'll connect you with those organizations. Perhaps you can get into a discussion and see if that can be helpful. Dipanshu? Uh,
I had requested Sayyid Afan to
uh,
unmute themselves, but seems like they're engaged in another meeting and won't be able to
right, all right.
unmute.
Okay, so I have answered Dipanshu's question.
Oh, yes. I think now we can move to Dr. Jigasa's question, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
I've requested her to unmute herself.
Thank you so much, sir. So I think you did partly answer that question that there should be some merit given to the fact that when farmers decide and they say these farm laws are not good for us, then there is merit in listening to their perspective on things and on questions that they know better. But I had another question, and that was that during this entire time, there was a certain way in which farmers' movement was being discredited by a certain section for what would be understood to be a fashioning of the farmer in popular media as a certain kind of body, which is somebody docile, somebody who's castely dressed, somebody who has no merriment or joy in their life, somebody who's lost all hope and is only toiling. And there was this interesting way in which the agrarian and the rural was being celebrated. And you mentioned the political side, the public side, who had thought, that highways which were imagined as this, neoliberal fast ways would, turn into slower, embodiment, spaces of joy, spaces where along with protest there was a certain way, therefore community langars and music, and sometimes also cards. So there was a certain way in which the rural or the agrarian countryside had come to or come at symbolically the gates of what would one understand as urban Delhi, with its might. And I was wondering that has do you think that there's also, I'm sure some at some part maybe you've engaged with this in the book, but because I've not been able to read the entirety of it, do you think that the movement could also be credited, because it seemed that it could be credited in also giving space and voice to farmers to say, well, uh, farmers are not entirely, that they have agency in living and being who they are, that it doesn't have to be a story of somebody on the somebody living in hopeless uh, you know life. So this shaming involved, the bit where, oh, you're absolutely fine, you're still not dying, why are you protesting? That kind of conversation, I thought, also got debunked in the process, and I was wondering if this is something that one could look at.
So
Yeah,
I've requested you to unmute yourself. Yes.
thank you. Yeah, Jigyasa, you are absolutely right that the kind of imagination that we have when we think of farmers, and I think even social scientists can be blamed to, carry that fixated image of a farmer or of a village, of somebody wearing torn clothes, not having enough to eat, or a shady home and muddy streets. That's an imagination of the rural which we still continue to have. I think that reality still exists. It's not that these aspects have gone away from rural India. But I think that is not the only reality of rural India. And what this movement had shown, that there is a need to look at this question from a different vantage point, and looking at it only from the perspective of poverty, where the other group is agency-less and therefore requires some kind of charity from the state, was something challenged fundamentally by them. There is another aspect associated to it, and that's the reason that I call this protest as one step in the movement, which is that one should look at the protest by the tribal populations which happened in Maharashtra, and where millions of farmers had walked all the way to Mumbai and stationed themselves in the Mumbai Maidan and demanded certain assurances from the government. And when the government assured and took some concrete steps towards distribution of the land, the protest came to an end. Now, that is also another reality of rural India farming community. The third aspect, which comes back time and again, is the issue of reservations, which was highlighted during the Jat agitations in Haryana, Patels in Gujarat, or Marathas in Maharashtra. Now, that is also another aspect and reality of the rural change which is happening. I think we need to engage with this question in a more nuanced manner, looking at its complexities, rather than continuing with our developmental frames, which we have been thinking for the last 40, 50 years. I think that is something which we need to engage with. And I think, as in terms of public policy, the other major question which comes is about the universalization of different benefits through public policies. Even that is a big question which comes into picture when we are talking about some of these. Because what these farmers were demanding, that if I'm not a landless laborer, or if I'm not an oppressed laborer, that doesn't mean that I can't raise the demands of a farming community. So what is the stand? What is the Where are they coming from? If you look at it as a logical question, what is there location where they are arguing this question for. Their location is to think for a bright future in this country, where even if they don't fit into the mainstream mainframes, they have a right to ask that question. I think that is something which we have not been able to take note of, be it academia, be it media, or even if the politicians, if we talk about. This movement actually raised some of these questions. I hope I answered your question. Okay, so there is a clarification by Said Afan. I meant that one of the protest pertinent and essential characteristics was assimilation of bodies that might have even had feudal characteristics. Okay, what I mean is that the movement gave space to even caste class differences that are inherently antithetical to certain unions and ideologies who were organizing the movement. Yes, you are right. So I wanted you to shed light on the question of minimum consensus that emerged despite fundamental. Yes. Now, again, I think sometimes we expect too much from a movement. We expect that a movement would be able to resolve all those differences which have been existing at the grassroots for centuries. I don't think a movement can do that. What a movement can do is to find out certain common grounds where, despite those situations, there is a possibility to get into a dialogue or to come into a political action. And it is very much possible that after carrying out that political action, these movements or their actors may actually go back to their earlier situations, be it feudal tendencies or be it oppressive tendencies and so on. So, this contradiction in people's movement is actually a characteristic of any people's movement. No movement can actually claim that it has resolved all those differences which existed at the ground and then it emerged. No, I don't think so. And we should not expect that from a movement. Uh, Regarding the Khap Panchayats, you are absolutely right that these are the same bodies which have also been alleged for spreading communal hatred in the rural India. So, when this movement was talking about communal harmony or different groups coming together, does it mean that those differences have gone away? Certainly not. Those differences remained and I think would continue to remain. But at the same time, it also created a ground where one could think of, perhaps rebuilding those communal ties and bridging those gaps. That's how this movement becomes pertinent. Okay? Yeah.
I hope Sayed Afan's question has been answered. If there are any more questions, then we can take them up or we can bring the session to a close. Mm. So I don't think there are any more questions. People can raise their hands. That permission has been given if there are questions. Yes, I don't think there are. Also, we are nearing 5 o'clock, and you had texted that you'd like to wrap up by 4:45. I understand that. Thank you so much, Dr. Suthar, for this extremely enriching talk about your book, and I'm sure it has opened up many avenues for us to think
There
about and for critical engagement.
is a question by Suhasini.
Is there a question? Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. There is a question. So Hasini has texted.
You want to read it or should I?
Yes, sir, I can read it. Hello, sir. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Since you were studying a movement that was still unfolding, I'm curious about the methodological challenges this posed. Your book weaves together archival work, policy analysis, field notes, and first person accounts. What led you to choose this mix? And while developing your theoretical argument, what were the main difficulties in staying empirically grounded? Also, did anything you observed on the field push you to rethink your initial assumptions or frameworks? If possible, could you share an example where the realities on the ground shifted your analytical direction?
Oh, Suhasini, many thanks. This is a wonderful question because these are the questions which actually we don't really engage with. And I'm so happy that you raised it and perhaps given me an opportunity to talk about it. Uh, so there are two kinds of things. One, in terms of methodology, about the presentation of the whole narrative. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? Which is basically the language. In what language you talk about a movement of this kind. And I realized that the academic language may not be actually sufficient to achieve that purpose. So, the language that, I mean, in a popular parlance which is used, we call it as a non-fiction language. I think that was a major challenge when I was working on it. But at the same time, my dilemma was that I I claim myself to be an academic, and that's how you all look up to me. Now, as an academic, in what ways I can achieve a fine balance between this methodological challenge and what comes from the field? Uh, Now, this dilemma was resolved by having certain sections which talked about the policy debates in India. Why? Because usually, otherwise, the movement is seen as a political series of events, which many other colleagues have already done, where they dealt with this whole issue in a chronological sense. Now, I realize that perhaps that's not the adequate way to look at it. We perhaps need to broaden it further. And one way to broaden it is to make the audience familiar with the policy debates. We should know actually what was happening in terms of debate, what was the context when these three laws came, and why it was said that what the state did was something absolutely unexpected. So that led me to bring in the policy debates. The third question is about its theoretical paradigm. And I think I would say that uh, I have not been able to do justice to that question. I did try to discuss it in the beginning when I'm talking about the theories of social movement and some of the unique ways in which this movement has contributed to this entire debate. But I believe I could have done more, and which I intend to do still, by looking at the emerging character of social movements in India. Now, at the ground, when I went for the field work, the challenge was actually twofold. One was that a movement, when it is ongoing, it's very sentimental moment. Everybody is charged, very emotional, and you also tend to get one, and you feel that everything that is happening is something justified, and one has to look at it from that perspective. Now, that may bring actually its own academic bias, because when I'm writing about it, I'm not writing it about it as a farm activist or as a union activist. I'm writing it from an academic perspective, and my job is to put various viewpoints before the audience, and then they can choose which one they are most convinced about. Now, when a movement is at its heights, it's also at the heights of its sentiments and emotions. While understanding those emotions, how do you try to understand it in a logical sense is a challenge which I think every researcher has. And when you will go to the field, let's say if you are going to the field to study poverty, of course you will feel emotional about those whom you consider poor. But at the same time, your writing and judgments should not only be guided by those emotions and sentiments. It also has to have a sense of logic into it. Why? Because for a reader, emotion matters. But remember, it's not fiction, it's non fiction that I'm talking. So, apart from emotion, the logic also has to be there. I think that having that as a balance is a challenge which every researcher faces, and I also face that challenge. I don't know how successful I have been. Perhaps you can, tell me better if I have been able to achieve that. But these are some of the dilemma which we face as an academic, as a writer. How to have a balance between emotions and the logic. Sometimes they may go in the same direction, sometimes they actually may get diverted. So these questions, like whether they were the real farmers, whether they were raising the genuine issues, why they were actually protesting here on the roads when COVID is happening, and whether they should wear jeans, whether they should have air conditioners, and so on and so forth. These are actually pertinent questions which one actually grapples with. But as an academic, how do you respond to them? Do you respond to them emotionally or do you respond to them logically? I think these are some of the challenges and dilemma I had. How successfully I have resolved, I don't know. You will be able to tell me better. Yeah, thank you.
But I think once we're able to get hold of the book and read it, we'll be able to know better.
Well, another good thing is that unlike my previous book, which was extremely expensive, and even I was not in a position to purchase it, this one we were able to negotiate, and the publisher also agreed that we should have a reasonable price so anybody can buy and purchase it. So I think you won't regret spending 350 rupees or so.
So tomorrow at the launch, I'm sure there will be books laid outside Triple S that people can buy if they go.
No, actually, it has been planned. It's at such a short notice that we have not been able to do that. So,
Oh, that's unfortunate. Uh, I think there are more questions in the
yeah, there is one question from Sakshi.
and Dr. Jigyasa wanted to be unmuted. I have requested her.
So
Um,
Chetan, just a second. There is a question, and the questions then keep coming up, but we also would have to close the session. So, sir, Sakshi Vadvas is the last question, which if sir wants to take up is fine. Otherwise, we could direct it towards him over an email. But this will be the last questions. We're closing down for questions. Sir,
Okay, I can take this question.
okay.
And a good thing is that Sakshi, yeah, actually, I have discussed about this in the book about the trolley times as an experiment. And I completely agree that, uh, uh, and one of the hybrid character of this movement was that the way it actually brought together the traditional means of communication and information and the modern means of communication and information. So they were very old fashioned speeches, placards, and banners and sloganeering, which was happening. But at the same time, there were social media platforms, YouTube channels, tweets, Facebook live telecast, and so much was happening. And again, a print newspaper like Trolley Times, publishing poetry, publishing op-ed kind of writings, book reviews. I think actually that was something really unique. In fact, I did speak to the Trolley Times editors, and I suggested that perhaps we should come together to get it running. We should not let it stop. We have not been able to progress much on that front, but that was my real desire, because this is something remarkable and we should not let it die. Uh, Yes, and you are also right that there is actually a growing inclination. I would tell you one another example. Apart from documentaries, songs, and now since you have two, three books on this subject, there is a photographer, Gori Gill, who has come up with an excellent collection of photographs of the farmer movement. And Gori has actually, I would say, given it a new shape altogether, the way you look at the protest site, where she's looking at it from a spatial perspective and the site perspective. Okay. The people are not in the front the way you will see otherwise, the way, the cover of the book also shows. So, this kind of a documentation of a movement we don't have before this. So, Gauri's work is remarkable work in that sense. And then you have lots of accounts which talk about this movement. I think Indian academia and other circles have actually uh, realized that they can work better on it. So I think I agree with you that this movement has actually provided a new color and shape to the whole idea of documenting a movement. Thank you, Sakshi, for this question.
Thank you, sir, for answering all the questions. This has been a very thorough, comprehensive session. Thank you for giving us your time on a Thursday afternoon for for talking about your book that has opened up various avenues of critical engagement, various issues that we were also able to discuss. Thank you to the participants for joining in. We will meet you all 2 days from now for our weekly Saturday Baithak, which is about the ideas of Dharma and Jyotiba Phule's work. So if that is a subject that interests you, to join us. There is another text on the chat box. No, okay. So it's Sakshi. Thank you for the insightful session. Thank you so much, sir, for talking to us. We're very grateful for your presence. And
Thank you, everyone here for asking these wonderful questions. It was really nice. And I hope to see you all sometime in CPS so that we can have a cup of tea and a chat.
hopefully tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you will be there. So most
Yeah.
welcome. Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye.